welcome. We're starting back up, and we're on public safety. So welcome, Chief Bolter.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon, Chief.
I think we're on tab 13.
First one to point that out, extra 10%.
Old chalkboard.
Oh, you're right, Melissa, you did as well. Sorry, second, you only get 5%.
So as you can see, the department manages 5 separate public safety operating budgets, which collectively account for approximately $5.6 million, with a proposed increase of increase to $5 million, just shy of $300,000 increase. So 5.6 to 5.9 is the proposed. The separate budgets are broken down on the slide before you, so I won't go through each one of those, but I'll give you a second just to take a look at those if you have any questions about them. The police department is currently authorized for 39 sworn officers, 7 dispatchers, 1 animal control officer, and manages 15 crossing guards at 10 different crossing posts, and then we have 3 administrative personnel, full-time and 1 part-time. So the budgets provide for maintenance of our current services and technology at the current level. These services, as you're aware, include response to emergencies and non-emergencies for medical needs such as illnesses or injuries, car crashes, domestic disturbances, hazards, and many types of crimes and investigations. These services also include traffic safety efforts, assessment of traffic-related conditions that Tom very eloquently spoke of earlier today, and building and residential safety checks that we do, crime prevention and education, and a host of other quality of life services. The services are provided through the collective efforts of the police officers, dispatchers, animal control officers, and the administrative personnel. The proposed budget focuses on equipment maintenance and replacement and compliance with some state mandates. We have had in-dash cameras in our cruisers now for many years. In fact, it's probably been close to 20 years that we've had them in most of our cars. We recently replaced them in May of last year. The state law requires usage of in-dash cameras statewide effectively July 2022, so we have been ahead of the curve on that for a decade and a half or so. But this proposed budget includes the addition of 3 cameras for other cars that we feel that there would be the same benefit to have it there, and 2 of those cars would be our school resource officer cars. So those cars are used to go back and forth to the school, to perform other functions within the community, and it's not unlikely that an SRO could stop a car, so it would be a benefit to have that in-dash camera there. And it also includes, this budget also includes the addition of mobile data terminals for those cars as well. The budget includes the mandates from last year for wellness and drug screening, as well as state-required training. It includes the replacement of our firearms that Deputy Chief Davis will discuss later. And included in this budget is a partial annual payment for the public safety radio system, and it's partial only because it's not in line with our fiscal year. But as you know, the public safety radio system has been implemented now. It's up and running, working on figuring out the efficiencies of it, but we will start that maintenance 1 year after it was fully installed, so that will be part of the next fiscal year. And that covers the police department, public works, the ambulance service, the public schools, and their transportation systems. Other areas of focus. This proposed police budget will help to prepare us for the cost of promotional testing in the fiscal year. Although there's no guarantee that there will be any supervisory vacancies within the next fiscal year, we can predict that it's very likely because we have 3 supervisors who will reach their normal retirement date of 25 years within 2 months after the end of next fiscal year, so starting July and August of 2023. So that's only 15 months away from today. The lieutenant and sergeant promotion lists are only valid to about mid-fiscal year at the latest, so we may have to test in the fiscal year 23. These are costly and lengthy processes that involve multiple steps that often include a written exam and an assessment center, and that marks one of the sort of the larger increases in one of our items. As you know, recruitment to replace officers is very challenging, and it could take in excess of 18 months to hire and train an officer. As it is, we have struggled with adequate staffing levels to support the level of service and demands we need. So we're looking at preparation for the future. As usual, wage increases due to contractual steps and GWI are responsible for the majority of the increases in these budgets, and they'll be discussed further in the next slide. In addition, there was a market adjustment to the crossing guards. And then the overtime, the proposed overtime account has an increase to get us closer to the actual expenses that we have. The drivers for our overtime are patrol shift replacement, for vacation use and sick use, for investigations, for training, and for community events and meetings. Okay, so the next slide with our budget highlights. Across all budgets, there was an aggregate increase of $168,620 in wages, mostly due to collective bargaining agreements. The largest exception was the increase for the crossing guards. The daily rate for the crossing guards has remained stagnant for many years and possibly even close to a decade or so. So the proposed increase is to adjust and bring that up to where the market is now. The minimum wage increase has increased, and it doesn't quite go by the minimum wage, but we did a comparison with other communities and found that it will benefit us for proper pay and retention to increase our wages for our crossing guards, a vital part to our youth safety as they cross toward their schools. So the next few slides will be handled by Deputy Chief Chris Davis.
Some of the highlights from this budget recommendation include some savings initiatives that provide us with some line item savings through long-term purchases and adjustments to vendors or providers. Some of these examples include us purchasing our oxygen tanks instead of just leasing them as had been done for years, many years prior. We recognized that was one area that we could reduce our overall costs while not sustaining any negative operational impact. By doing so, over the course of a period of about 5 years, we'll realize a savings of approximately $9,500. Another area where this is true is our mobile data terminal service, wireless service. Simply by switching vendors, we determined that we could save several $1,000s a year, roughly $3,600 a year, while not losing any functionality or service as well. Additionally, after conducting an analysis of our holiday payouts for several years, we were able to reduce the amount budgeted after discovering that since 2015, the budgeted amount for our holiday pay to our officers that were actually paid out has steadily decreased, as officers typically prefer to take time off than receive the actual holiday pay itself. To account for this, we base this budget request on an 85% expenditure of holiday pay. We've also budgeted for an increase of $11,532 in gasoline due to market conditions.
I have a quick question on the gasoline. So, is that projection since the crisis began? What percentage increase is that? Because I think I think we're
I'm gonna redirect that question over to the corner.
I think in a few months' time we'll all be wishing for $4 gas. So.
Yeah, we are in an uncomfortable position right now with our projections on our fuel. We had for years been buying it through a consortium that was actually run with a bunch of boards of education. The gentleman who was running that consortium retired this year, so we lost a little ground in terms of when we were going to make our purchase. And the way the consortium worked is, and it worked well for us, was we pre-purchased all of our fuel. So being that it's a commodity and it goes up and down every day, we don't have the benefit, or we wouldn't see the benefit if we took a hard bid and picked a random day to say, we want to buy fuel based upon the price on this day. And it's worked well, but when the consortium kind of changed hands, we had some discussion as to whether or not we could still purchase through that same supplier. So we lost a little ground in that. And as we were doing that from our original projections that were used for this budget, which I think it was $2.60, $2.65 a gallon, prices were going up. I said, okay, we're going to hold, we're going to wait. Well, now we're into all new territory. So the good thing is we're not going to buy fuel today. We are hoping that the market will settle back down before our contract expires, which is at the end of August of this year. So we're at a level of risk, but At the same time, we're very hopeful that things will turn around between now and end of summer. If we did have to purchase, we would maybe go even onto a spot market where we would purchase small allotments, so we wouldn't, even then, if the things haven't returned to normal, buying it all outright.
Yeah.
So can I just tap onto that? Because I was seeing throughout the budget, the gasoline, like for the Parks and Rec, showed a 34% projected increase in gasoline, but you guys are just saying 17%. Like, why is one department projecting more for gas than another?
So, in all likelihood, we're using the same rate.
Okay,
I can speak for how we determine how much we need, is we look at the gallons we've used for previous years. And so our usage has not been the same as it has in the past. There were times where we transitioned to different vehicles, and it was an anticipated savings. We didn't budget for that, but then there ended up being a savings. The newer cars get considerably better gas mileage than the
Okay.
old ones. We had a little setback in 2015 when we started carrying Narcan in the cars. Cars have to run all the time, most of all the time, because that medicine has to stay in a certain temperature range. So, we keep adjusting that, and just based on last year's usage, we were able to come down a little bit from what we expected.
okay. And, yeah, I was just I think I'm looking at it incorrectly. I was looking at it as a percentage increase in gas costs for one department and less, but there's
Yeah,
also the usage is factored in there,
It was
so.
of our usage,
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that.
I apologize for this question in advance because it's thematically appropriate, so I was going to ask now. Where are you at in your thought process on electric vehicles?
So we've had many discussions about it, and several with Tom about this. Right now, the police vehicles don't offer a great package for us. I know there are some communities, like I believe it's Westport, that have gone to using Teslas.
They're not all that expensive, I'm just saying, they're not.
And honestly, like
Sure.
their savings projections are incredible. It's
Yeah.
just like that
Yeah.
style vehicle is not the best vehicle for our use. I don't think. We do need storage space. We need to be able to get in places that maybe Westport doesn't have to get into.
They don't arrest people down there either.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things.
You gotta be able to throw up in it and clean it
I would-
easily.
Yeah.
I would very
Right in the
much like
back.
to see
Yeah, it's all
at
that
least a
stuff.
hybrid option for us, because, an officer could go out on the road, at 7 AM today and find that they are stuck at a scene with the car running for 6 or 8 hours, and we
Mhm.
only have 5 hours running, whatever the case may be, a quick changeover. So we were trying to figure out, like, what we do for charging stations, how would that work? There are some cars that are take-homes, maybe that's the first option, but then how do you set up, take that home? And, we have instances, I can go through the number of times that I've been called out where my car's been sitting or running, I've gone from location to location, and I don't really want to have to worry about the time that it's running, but I would like to see a solution for that.
You'd have a very supportive board member here if you did that. Thanks. Appreciate it.
This budget request also seeks funding for several CNR projects, including the purchase of 3 police cruisers and 1 administrative vehicle. The police cruisers follows our regular replacement cycle, and administrative vehicle purchase is also in line with our department's overall fleet replacement plan. Additional CNR project requests include the purchase of 3 in-car dash cameras at a cost of an additional $8,000 a year, and 3 additional mobile data terminals, as well as the funding of a professional staffing study. The purchase of the in-car cameras and mobile data terminals brings us in compliance with state law that states that police vehicles that are used in a police patrol capacity are required to be equipped with in-car cameras, and the cameras require a mobile data terminal to function properly.
Chief, the other night, Rick Bizzano was talking about
That motion?
something about you had to upgrade your cars to Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi cable.
Yeah, that was in that motion.
So what is, I mean, I missed it, I didn't want to stop him. So what is that, what exactly are we moving to gain what, to a certain extent?
So, for the car to have connectivity, we have to go through a service. And right now, we use the Capital Region Council of Governments for that service, and they charge X. It's $1,000 per vehicle, basically. And that gets us the connectivity through the cell lines, so we can do everything on the.
So you look at my license plate to see my
That-
infractions and all that, that's
that-
what's coming through like the motor vehicle database?
Sure,
That's-
yeah. So anytime we want to look either somebody up or a registration, anytime we want to search our database for history, for a location, anytime we want to write a report, if it's not a long, very long report, we can write that in the cars. That's, in years past, we would have to take a thumb drive and put that in,
Uh-huh.
and then, now it all gets uploaded. And so the same thing with a lot of our body camera and in-dash technology too, so that's automatic. So we have found a better route to go that saves us more money. So instead of CROG managing that aspect of it, because there's a technical aspect to
Yep.
manage there, not in the car, but outside of the car. that we
Sure.
don't do it. We're working with our vendor for our RMS system, our records management system, to have that hereby, under our control. And it is, I forget the price, it's $120 per vehicle, and then there's a monthly charge through FirstNet, which is the public safety
Users-
broadband
right.
network. So it ends up being an automatic 3,000 or so savings per year for us with that, which kind of rolls in nicely to getting 3 additional ones, because we will still have savings even after those 3 additional ones with this move. And it doesn't put a lot of additional needs on IT.
Thank you.
The funding of a professional staffing study is meant to allocate money to have a professional and independent comprehensive study to evaluate the appropriate current and future staffing needs of our agency.
That one's really important, right? Because we've had,
100%.
as long as I've been on this board, we've had a debate every year about the right number of officers, and there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of metrics. Obviously, there's a lot of professional perspective that you guys add, but I think this will help us as a board and as a community, I think, chart the path forward for where are we going again, and what do we want to put up from a funding standpoint to maintain levels, increase levels, and be the community police department I think we all want to be, and what does that look like? I do want to caution us, though, that it could tell us that 6 is actually a low number. It could tell us more, right? We're going to have a decision to make, but I think it's the right study. We did a Parks and Rec study, right? We've done a facilities master plan. We've done a Board of Education building study. We do a lot of these types of studies, and I think this one makes a lot of sense. I don't know if you guys want to comment more on that, but just from Maria, it seems to make sense to me to help put some additional perspective into an important conversation.
No, I think you summed it up very nicely, Sean. I think it's something that could certainly add a lot of value. I have had experience doing a couple of these in the past, working with consulting firms that specialize in this work. And again, I think just given the amount of conversation we've had and the length of time we've had it, to have a potential, long-term roadmap for us, again, I do think could add value.
One of the things, Sean, one of the things why I'm really behind this, I would accept the potential outcome being higher, okay, is because, Jenna, I appreciate your position as a volunteer. One of the things that's been most frustrating about the most recent campaign to increase our complement is that we use a statistic, right? And the statistic isn't Simsbury, though. And that's my problem, is like we always benchmark ourselves over Avon or whatever. So I would like someone to come in, live with us, and see what does Simsbury need, because so if we're at 1.6 and we're supposed to be at 2.1, whatever that, I apologize for that, but I didn't know. But that's a non-reflexive number with no intuition to it. It's just based upon population. I need to know what that consultant says. Your town needs this many to deliver X experience, and that's why I value that. And if it comes up high, I'll support that.
And it's important that we craft the RFP that way, but yes, what level of community policing do we expect? What level of community involvement? And I venture to guess there's a lot of varying levels to what we can give from a service standpoint. This is not just hours of patrols on the road, how many folks are on overnight. There should be more to it in terms of what do we want to be as a community and have a relationship with our police department. So I think that's, to me, the appeal of it.
As previously discussed, the purchase of an additional mobile data terminals at a cost of $19,000 brings us into compliance with the spirit of the law, requiring us to have in-car cameras in all cruisers performing patrol functionality. As far as the sidearm replacement request, modern technology allows for increased performance by the officer by means of improved accuracy, improved reliability and function and form, and from a simplified mechanical design, better sizing as well as fitting to different officer hand sizes through adjustable frames, which ultimately increases public safety, officer safety, and suspect safety. Weapons manufacturers recommend that due to the thousands of rounds fired during police duty and length of service, that they get completely refurbished after 10 years. Our current firearms are 10 years old and are at a point where that we either need to pay to have them refurbished or spend the money towards new weapons, which incorporates that new technology and accuracy advances. By switching the firearms, we would be changing from a .40 caliber weapon to a 9mm weapon, which would also provide us with approximately $15,000 in savings on ammunition costs as well.
Can I ask a question? What happens to the old firearms?
So we either, we have a vendor that we would trade them in towards the purchase of the new weapons.
Cost
Is a net?
Yeah.
with the trade-in.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering. And do you have tasers also? Okay, so everybody, the officers have one of each, right?
The tasers are on a different schedule, right?
Yeah.
We did those a couple years ago.
Yeah, we do have the tasers on the MCNR replacement schedule as well in an out year of the plan.
Okay.
I think it's the fall,
Following year?
24.
Yeah.
And we do vests as well on what, 5-year schedule?
It's every 5 years, and
5 years
that's
service.
not all consistent on the years, because
We don't
when
have
they're hired, they get a vest, and so it's
Right.
not all in the same
Those are
time.
staggered.
But there is one large group that is coming up, I think, in 28 or 29.
Yeah, 28, you have it on here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take it back to Chief Holder.
Thank you. Chris, I don't know what to say when I get to the rate part, but we'll keep moving. So let's talk about the accreditation specialist first. We've been state accredited since the early 2000s. After we received that, we then moved into the CLIA, or the national accreditation. That started in 2008, and it's a 3-year process, and we were accredited in 2011. To maintain the accreditation, we have had an officer that's been assigned to accreditation almost full-time since about 2010. She has not done all this work on her own, but it's so important to have somebody who is up on what the changes are for the best practices. There's hundreds and hundreds of standards that we have to follow, that we have to interpret, that we have to figure out how we're going to do. Both Chief Ingvartson and I felt that it was really important to have a police officer at the time working together for accreditation. That way we had the practical aspect, somebody who actually does the work, and then the best practices, a sort of academia aspect, working together. That's been solid now for well over a decade. You know, we've had accreditation. Very proud of it. I think it's been a huge benefit. But I think since it's so well established now, there's a move that we can make to have that position a civilian position, and that way we can more effectively use a sworn officer's training elsewhere. So I'd really like to see, an accreditation specialist in there, and then, like I said, we could make use of the officer in other places. And then the other request on here is for the staffing of 6 officers. And I'm going to start off with this industry standard here in a moment.
Love it.
So the combination of staffing levels and the budget has prevented us from filling some lateral assignments over the years to address traffic concerns and investigations to a level that I think we should be delivering. That is, more preventive efforts for traffic safety and more timely investigations. We're looking for 6 more officers. If we look to other police departments, comparable communities, the region, the state, the nation, our rate of 1 officer for every 1,000 residents is well below the norm by at least 6 officers. So the rate that we're at is 1.57. And that rate does not speak to crime needs or anything like that. It's just a number. It's the same thing as if when we look to see what somebody's salary should be or how something should be set up. We go out and we look at other communities and we say that's what they're doing. That may or may not work, and then we usually fall somewhere in there, either on the lower end, the middle end, or right where that is. You know, there's a range in there. But we're considerably low in that sense. Our comparable towns are 1.8. The state of Connecticut is 2.1, the number you remember. New England is 1.9, and the Northeast is 1.8. And again, we're at 1.57, so we haven't even reached that 1.6 yet. We have seen some staffing trends over the last many years, 5 or 6 years. We average anywhere from 1 to 3 vacancies each year. At times, we have had 4 vacancies simultaneously. That causes overtime. It causes a stretching of personnel, limiting the levels of services, and a considerable amount of time to hire and train replacements is a big factor. In addition to vacancies, we have had long-term leave due to illnesses and injuries. Couple that with vacation time usage, and that accounts for most of our overtime. About 8 or so years ago, we temporarily reassigned the traffic enforcement officer. It was in 2017. We had him. About 8 or so years ago, we had a traffic enforcement officer that was designed for answering all these calls that people have about speed, stop signs, all sorts of things that a patrol officer wasn't able to really dedicate their time to. So we had that officer from 2009 to about 2017. In 2017, the staffing issues grew so considerably that we needed to start pulling. In fact, at one point, we were rotating our detectives from their regular assignment for investigations and support to on the road. They would take two weeks at a time to cover some road work. So since 2017, the traffic enforcement has been the responsibility of the patrol officer, in addition to their emergency and non-emergency calls for service. We want to assign 2 traffic officers, and I know that Sean had mentioned it earlier about the driving that's out there now. I think we've all seen it. Those 2 traffic officers, one would be for the day and one would be for the evening, because that's really when we have a majority of our traffic issues. We need more officers in order to be able to do this efficiently. So if we take the officers that we have now, then now we're going to be creating holes in our patrol schedule, and that not only causes overtime, but causes some other issues that I'll address here shortly. But the traffic enforcement officer not only enforces traffic, but they also assess our needs for traffic calming measures, for signage, line of sight concerns, speed limits, et cetera. They conduct reports, they attend classes, they set up all the survey equipment to find out how many cars are traveling down a road. They look at the volume, they look at the direction, they look at the size of the vehicles and the speeds. And then they'll be able to participate in our collaborative roadway safety efforts that right now either the deputy or I are doing when we look at issues and go out, and look at a spot and say, what are we going to do here? They will be able to address the 500 or so requests that we get a year for traffic-related issues. I mentioned like speed and crosswalks and sharing our roadways. All those things will be addressed more efficiently with traffic officers. The patrol officers will also retain that enforcement because that's really one of their primary functions out there. But it has to be put to the side when they have to go to a medical call or where they have to investigate something. But as they're patrolling, part of their function is to look for violations or a way to improve traffic. But these traffic officers will be able to focus on that. I think it was a very successful program when we had it with Officer Gary Gray. Everybody knew his car. Everybody knew car 22. It said traffic on it. They all knew him, and he stopped thousands of cars a year. And
Multiple times, sometimes.
Sometimes the same people.
Sand Hill Road.
And I don't have to say to you, but those are thousands and thousands of opportunities every single year that we generate and we should be generating to change the driving behavior and make it safer for everybody, but also to work at some of those other things about why we need more officers is because I think through some of the troubled times that we've had and issues we've had in society in general, people have looked to us as their neighbors, as people who are out there caring for them, wanting to help them. We have not been viewed necessarily as other police officers have during some really troubled times. And I think that relationships that we build with them on a traffic stop, on a medical call, on whatever we do, is so very important that it develops relationships, support, and really accomplishes the mission a bit better. So, with those traffic stops, most people think if they haven't been stopped, that they all get tickets, and that's really not the case here. The purpose is to change driving behavior and make it safer. So I see a couple nods. Let's see, I kind of got off track here. Okay, so staffing trends. So although the monetary cost of overtime is always a concern, we need to seriously consider what the overtime does for the employee and the organization. We have noticed a trend, and there's been a shift. More officers value time off than earning overtime. Officers don't want to work as much overtime as they did before. A pre-pandemic look at the overtime shifts from 2015 to 2019 showed that a greater percentage of overtime shifts are staffed by people who don't want to work that overtime shift. So we looked at 6 months of all those years, and it's going up. The number's going up. It went up to 40% of the overtime shifts are for people who don't want to be there. So I think that shows what a sort of a personnel trend that we're dealing with.
Chief, explain that, just for everybody to understand. You ask for volunteers first, right? And then you have to
We do.
order folks to come in?
We do, yeah. So when a shift opens up, whether it's because of vacation or sick time, or they have to go to a training, whatever it may be, we have minimum staffing requirements. So we will call that out first, and there's a whole process. If it's 4 days before the actual shift, then it gets put up on a board and gets called out. If it's right away, it gets called out, and then the person has to stay from the shift before. So right now, we have X number of people working during the day. If a shift opens up on B Squad today, on the evening shift, they'll quickly call it out. They'll see if somebody wants it. If they don't want it, then one person is staying.
Excuse me, Chief, what percentage of the overtime is from someone just caught on a particular situation versus sort of the scheduled overtime?
There's rarely any scheduled over, meaning.
Well,
like,
I mean,
meaning
the,
Holdovers versus,
holdovers?
like holdovers.
yeah, the
versus other-
holdovers.
Like if there was an accident, they had to stay? It's very little.
Okay.
Most are, so I'll give you an example. Last year, we had 406 8-hour patrol shifts that were overtime shifts. We don't have nearly that. I mean, the occasional 15 minutes that comes through that people stayed, an hour, 2 hours, that is a very small portion. We don't keep track of it, but I've seen the list, and I know that it's not a significant amount.
Okay,
Are you
thank
asking a
you.
different question in terms of pre-plan? Like, I know I'm going on vacation in a month versus I just got sick this morning? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, sort of a breakdown of all three, a
Okay,
little
so
bit.
like, so that, because you were talking about holdovers, like somebody's finishing a scene, right?
Yes,
But
yeah.
like, so I'm going on vacation, and my brother's wedding or whatever it is, can somebody take my shift in 2 weeks? Versus I have to go to the doctor today. Are you seeing an increase in the last minute calls for not being able to come in?
So I don't know. I do know that over that 5-year period, almost 50% of it was because of vacation leaves. 50% of that, and so those have to be planned out to the most part.
Okay.
We don't authorize an overtime if it's within 24 hours of the shift, unless it doesn't create any overtime. So those would be planned, but 50% of those overtime shifts were because of vacation time. And again, over that same 5 or 6 year period, about 30% was because of sick leave.
Okay, and then.
And
it's
which would be also like injured too, like if there was a long, whether it's an illness, an injury, or a last minute, I don't feel well.
Okay, and is training and staff meetings, are those considered part of someone's actual schedule, or are those?
So
considered
it depends. So we run 24/7. So if someone is normally working the midnight shift, there's very little training that's offered to them on that midnight shift. So we have to change them. So we have to pull them from that shift, and oftentimes that creates overtime on that shift.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
Yep. And then, there's some training, If we go through training through POST, the Police Officer Standards and Training Council, or many of these private trainers, they're like, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, and we have shifts that are 7 to 3, 3 to 11, and 11 to 7, so it becomes a little complicated.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have seen that there's a greater percent of overtime shifts that are staffed by officers who are forced to work. In 2015, about 15% of our patrol overtime shifts were ordered, people who were ordered to be there. 2019 pre-pandemic, 30%. So it almost doubled. 2020 was 24%, and then 2021 last year was 40%. And what we saw last year was more people made use of their vacation time than they had the year before during the first year of the pandemic. So I think it's reasonable to assume at some point that officer productivity, their health and wellness, and then the potential liability can be affected by overtime. So that's a concern to me. That trend is also supported by their choice of compensation for holidays, as the Deputy Chief had mentioned. Officers have a choice of pay or time for the holidays. And since 2015, there's been a steady decrease in the amount of officers that have taken pay. They've taken their time off. So it just shows where the shifts sort of in values have been. But when people take time off, in many cases, we have to fill that.
Yeah.
Just so you know, we don't backfill like our administrative assignments for detectives, the community services, offer things like that. We have started backfilling, trying to backfill some of our school resource officer vacancies when they're significant. That's recent. There's also been a trend of leaving law enforcement as close as to normal retirement date as possible. So we've seen it in the state with the state police, but we've seen it all around the state. We've seen it all around the nation, and we saw it here last year. We had 2 people leave just prior to their 25 years, and one almost a year after their 25, so close to 26 years. So we're looking at the 5 officers who are quickly approaching their normal retirement date, starting July 2023. There are 2 in July and one in August. Out of those 5, 4 of the 5 are supervisors. So we're not only losing bodies, but we're losing that organizational history and experience and the supervision that's come with that. Or we could be losing that. My counterparts in other jurisdictions are having difficulty finding and hiring new officers. The pool is not large, and the pool is oftentimes not very good. I expect the same will be for us. The up to 18 months from hired or full-time trained may be extended because of that. We don't know what it's going to look like back then. We look at comparable towns in other jurisdictions as standards for many aspects. For staffing, we're very low, and it will take about 6 officers to get us to that normal or that standard. Getting to that industry standard or normal will allow us to efficiently provide a level of service that's more responsive and engaged in our community. It will address the identified trends that we saw, support the impact of the potential retirements, and the recruitment concerns that we have. That's all I have.
Okay, so I want to jump in on this one. So first of all, I think the elephant in the room, I'm going to call it an elephant in the room, is that, Police Commission has asked for 6 officers, right? The current budget doesn't ask for any, and that ask for us, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but I think we should talk about it now, is for really 2 officers, but one is to replace the accreditation person, right? So I think we can see the numbers, how it impacts the mill rate at that level. One of the things that I got some information from Jenna on that, and you've pointed out too, is the number of retirees coming in the next budget year, right? So could be 5 people leaving in 23, 24. Last year, the ask was by the commission was for 3, and we did none, right? So let me get this back. So the retirements are coming, the time to hire is what you're telling us. We also didn't fund last year because we had 3 outstanding officers at the time, was one of the reasons I remember giving, because we still had to fill those 3, which took about a year to fill, correct? So we finally filled those 3.
And they're still on training right now.
Okay, so they're still on
Not-
training.
And not, of no fault of theirs. They're doing really well, but they're still on training.
So I'm obviously for the service improvement at this point in time, but the question that I'm trying to ask here is there room, and haven't seen the numbers for 2 officers and the CALEA specialist, because I'm also questioning how long will it take to fill that CALEA position? I don't know, right? But if the CALEA position takes a long time to fill, we're really not adding 2 officers, we're adding 1 officer.
That's correct.
So that's a factor I have there. Given the 5 retiree potential, and it sounds like people may want out of the force, no offense, by next budget year, it's gonna take us that long to get anybody budgeted, right? The other thing is, I believe we have a tool where we don't have to fully budget. We can use, I think it's vacancy rate. Is that?
I had in the past, when we were carrying a vacancy rate in the police department, said that, we could certainly take a look at perhaps a vacancy rate for the police department. Now that we're fully staffed, I don't think that would be advisable. And our other departments are just too small. We did take a look, and Melissa and I put together an analysis organization-wide in terms of salary savings, budget versus actual, if perhaps that's something the Board of Finance wanted to explore. We have that information, but again, I think for the police department, now that they're fully staffed, I don't think a vacancy rate for them would be advisable.
So even, I guess my point was, if we have, say we have 2 openings in a CALEA specialist, and we know it's gonna take 6 months to hire them, we don't need to fund that full position from the beginning of the budget, do we?
Well-
I'm just looking for ways to see how it could happen, work, yeah.
Yeah, so my understanding, just again, past history, was that the Board of Finance generally had asked us to budget and show the position in the entirety of the fiscal year.
Okay.
So we didn't have a mini cliff to catch up the following year, but in some circumstances, when we've had tighter budgets, I think, I'm just thinking out loud, but I believe they did have us budget the parks position, because we had anticipated a fall hire date. I think we maybe budgeted that at like 9 months instead of a full 12 months. So on occasion, I think that's happened, but I
Okay.
think the preference, and I don't know if Lisa's here, but in the past, that was the direction we had been given, was budget a full year. But
Okay. And again, I'm talking, I don't know what this looks like to the mill rate, because we're trying to not go anywhere near there. I know 6 is, 6 is just really gonna push it out, and then facing the debt service, but I would like to look at 2 plus the CALEA, just to see if that's even, and I'm gonna let everybody else talk. The other thing that I heard here today was, this whole traffic calming effort by Tom, right? You use officers and PD to do that, and that's like a big priority for the Public Works Department. So I'm just putting that out there as something that we should discuss.
Yeah,
Can I ask a,
Yeah, you mind if I just speak on your initial question about
Sure.
the 2 and the 1?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know.
6 months.
Yeah.
I would not expect that it would take 6 months to find somebody for accreditation.
Okay.
Yeah, for accreditation. Anything can happen. It does, but I would not expect that. And although it may take 18 months to hire somebody and to put them on the road by themselves, about 50% of our officers have been certified elsewhere. And so that doesn't take that long. That takes 3-4 months of training once you find them. But that being said, we've put it out there before, and we've had no applicants in the past. Our last one, Officer Kyle Colby, went through really quickly, very good hire, so that worked out really well. He was part of the recruitment process in March, April, May, June. We hired him in July. He was on the road a short time later. So that worked out really well, but again, that's 50% of the time is what we have been doing. From what I've heard from, my peers in other communities, the pool has really diminished, and so it's been 9 months since we've looked to hire anybody. So it could be shorter than we're expecting, it could be even longer than the 18 months.
so I just want, help me understand, our budget, Maria's message does ask for a sworn officer. correct?
Correct. I had recommended.
Service improvement.
But just, so, but,
Born and then the
what, the
accreditation.
accreditation, right, so, but I mean, so we are, so in we are adding a capability, a public safety capability in that aspect. Okay, it's
Yeah.
not just keeping a 53
It's before
person
you-
complement, okay.
No, it would be 54.
And then, so what, so is the ask then truly 6, or is it five, does it become 5, long-term?
It's truly 6 with the accreditation specialist.
Okay, so that's the benchmark there,
Yeah.
okay.
And.
I mean, it's, we're
and, you know,
benching
and
off
we
of
have-
that,
and we
okay,
have-
excuse me.
You know, there's a plan for those. It's not just to throw them into the mix. So, like I had said earlier, like, since 2017, we haven't had the ability.
Traffic, yeah.
Traffic, and
Yeah.
we've been at 39 officers now since the deputy was hired, November 2020, of 20. Yeah, we've been at 39, but we haven't had that many people available because we haven't been at 39 since, yeah, we did, because we had 2 people leave. We've had people in the academy, we've had people training, we've had some unfortunate long-term leaves for illnesses, one from an on-the-job, that was back in May, and he returned last month, with a broken elbow. So even though we have those numbers, we're still not able to put a detective in for the 3 that we need and that we've always had. We're not able to put that 1 traffic officer back in, and I really think the need is there for 2. So what we would see is there would be an addition or a supplement to our patrol force by 3 or 4 if we did all these other things. And really, the plan is like, it's kind of gone on a little too long, so I want to make those moves regardless of whether we're hiring. We're going to have to figure other ways to readjust, and whether that is dealing with overtime, but then that just brings to my point and concern about what's that doing to the officer? What's that doing to the employee, their health and their well-being and their productivity? What are we expecting out of them after working a 16-hour shift and then coming back? And then coming.
When was the last time we went up on patrol officers? Because we've done some leadership restructuring, but it's been.
2016, we went from 36 to 38.
Yeah, we added 2 that.
And then it was 2008 before that.
So since 16, ballpark, what are we looking at for calls of service?
So, it's a very, very
No,
nice.
it's not the easy.
It's a very nice community to live in. We should all be very, very proud and fortunate, because the calls for service really have not changed drastically, except in a few categories, and I'll point out a couple.
Please.
One is the medical calls.
Yeah.
The medical calls went from, in 2010, they went from roughly 1,300 or 1,400 to now 1,800 calls a year. We are the first responders. We have looked at, and you have mentioned it in the past, about our time to get to these calls. That's one we have been monitoring, because we are there, we need to be there very quickly. That time is slowly starting to get longer and longer, the time it takes us to get to these calls.
And that's nearly a 50% increase with roughly the same complement on patrol.
Yes, and with an increase in numbers of people in town,
Right.
but also even with the development of the locations. Like, we did not have to drive through the field across from the Weetog Firehouse, prior to 3 years ago. Now we have to drive through there, not to go to a call, but to patrol. Like, there's expansion in town that we are now responsible to go in and out of and keep a watchful eye on. So medical calls have gone up. There's other calls that end up fluctuating, like the car theft trend. We went from 3 or 4 car thefts to, I think it was 2016, maybe it was 9. Actually, I have it right over there. If you can pull up the motor vehicle theft one. It went from like 7 or 8 to 9 to 20 to 32.
My favorite question, anybody's car been stolen without the keys in it yet?
No.
So just to confirm for the friends at home, every single car that's been stolen has had the keys in it.
This is one of his annual statements.
11 years running. It's the most frustrating thing.
Let's hope your car's still out there.
It is. 'Cause you know
Chief
what? My
Davis,
keys
while he's
are-
looking for that, just level set for, probably just my own do we have any open positions right now? Are we staffed? Okay, whether or not they're deployed fully, but so we're zero, so we're all staffed, we're staffed up, okay. All our hiring right now is current, okay, thank you.
I have a quick question about the retirements. When does a person who's planning on retiring, do they have any window of time to let us know, or is it just almost like a quit, like they just let you know when it's gonna happen, or?
It's just the town policy.
Yeah.
So which is it? I don't have to? I don't have,
Yeah, I mean-
we don't have to give 6 months notice or whatever?
Is there an opportunity to offer a modest financial incentive to get 6 months of notice for retirement?
Yeah, it would definitely, I mean, that would definitely help for planning purposes, and, you know, our world is a little bit different from the Board of Ed world, and they sort of work on school year and contracts
Right.
that go with the school year, and so they often have a lot of advance notice in terms of when somebody is planning to retire. In our world, it's just so different with our year-round operation. We might get 3 weeks, we might get 3 months. People might work beyond just because they're finding fulfillment in their job, so it's really just so hit or miss for us. There's, unless somebody is planning really far in advance, we tend to not have more than, what would you say, maybe 3 to 6 months at
Yeah,
the most,
yeah, if that,
if that.
yeah.
Do you-
Retirement age, then, you know, then till either they start looking beforehand, if they were, and they kind of know, I think, whether or not they're
Yeah.
gonna either stay for a couple more years or whether they're gonna kind of bail right at the
Yeah.
retirement age.
Yeah, when they
And
had a
then
calendar
for a
with
job,
like the X's on it, big circle.
it depends on when job opportunities, whatever it is that they're gonna do.
If they're going to a second
come up.
career, it depends on when they get the
Right.
second,
Correct.
they get the second career too, yeah.
It may take several months for that, and then, but then once they're offered a job, then.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this field is, like, if we know somebody is going to retire, like, we pull them as quickly as we can from a lot of the services that could create liability,
Yeah,
going to court,
yeah.
you know, anything, because you then don't have them. Like, you don't have them after that to be able to go to a court hearing or a court
Yeah.
case, or, and, I mean, really, in our profession, it's, you know, more likely that you're going to get injured from a lot of other positions, and who wants to get injured their last day of work, you know? So we normally pull that. So if we did have 6 months of notice, it may be sort of a transition
Right.
elsewhere, and we, you know,
So Chief, I know you said that a number of these retired officers who are eligible for retirement are in supervisory
Yeah.
roles. And at what level ideally would you bring new officers in at, and what would that look like
So
salary-wise?
sure, so contractually, we have to bring them in at the patrol officer level.
Okay.
So, and that's a $30,000 difference between, like, entry-level patrol officer and top step for a patrol officer. So if we were to have, say, a sergeant or a lieutenant retire, we would not have the savings from a lieutenant all the way down to a new officer, because somebody has to get promoted up to that position. But there is roughly like a $25,000 to $30,000 difference between, you know, if somebody was to go.
Do we,
Whether it's a,
do we pay more than Avon does? Or Granby for a first step, for entry?
First step, we're actually pretty low, but we have 9 steps.
Okay.
And
So have a broader band so you can make more money as a patrol officer in Simsbury than you can in Avon. Is that
I
what you're
don't know
saying?
about Avon.
I'm just,
I mean,
we're
I
always,
don't-
we're always being held against Avon, right? Against, so why not throw it in there?
DC plan too.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Whereas Simsbury did
They
not.
did?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's been a challenge for them to hire.
And there's a trend where they're going back,
Avon,
to defined benefits.
yeah, they did years
A lot
ago.
of towns
and
are.
they've not been able to keep their full complement, right?
Yep.
And that's been one of the big reasons.
And not just them.
Yeah, and again, I'm a DC plan guy, but at the same time, the profession hasn't gone there. So it's, when you're competing for talent, it's a big consideration.
As far as your question about other calls for service, and I have the theft numbers here for car thefts, I should say. Early 2000s, we used to go between 3, 5, maybe 6 would be a high number, but 2015, we were at 6. 2016, we were at 7. We started to see the jump in 2017. It almost tripled. It was up to, or doubled. It was up to 17, and then 16 and 18. And then 2019, we had 20 car thefts. 2020, we had 31 car thefts. And then last year, we saw the dive down here and regionally throughout the state. So we had 9 last year, and I believe we're at 2 this year.
Wow.
People are finally taking their keys inside.
Yeah. So, and each one of those is at minimum a 40-hour investigation. And the front end of that is a patrol officer, trying to figure out any evidence, tracking things down, and then it moves on to the detectives, which we have not been able to staff to 3 now. And they're doing some fantastic work. I mean, we've got some cases going now where we have made arrests on the drivers. We have really good leads on the drivers. They're doing a lot of work.
So,
They're 16 and they're right back on the street 4 hours later, though, right?
on recruiting, no offense to any of the police officers, but I think we basically have like three celebrities in town. And, Mark, Officer Rudowitz is one of
He
them.
retired, man.
So talk about recruitment and backfilling of that type of
Who are the
special.
other two?
Well, I struck a nerve. I struck a nerve. He won't even hear the rest of this question until he gets an answer. In my eyes, Officer Gray. I think Officer Gray is a celebrity, and in my kid's eyes, Officer Cushman. Right. So that's okay.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Nice
You got
save.
the right save. So talk about the recruitment for an animal control. Well, that's got to be really specialized, right? So how are we coming with that? And
It's a slow process, but we do have applicants. It's closed. We're going through a testing process, and we will look to find.
and educate me how that individual. I think the mistake in my own first, but I consider him to be a police officer, and he is not.
Correct.
That position. Pardon me, not he.
Correct.
Defined. That position is not. So why not? And look to that to make sure that is an additional component to.
Because that'll add 7 officers to that list?
Well, to me, there's. The bears aren't hibernating in the winter, so you have it. No, that's not. But are hibernating. So you have that time down. So I'm just saying, why isn't that position?
Well, and there are
considered?
jurisdictions that do that, and it's sort of an assignment, sometimes a rotational assignment. Sometimes somebody gets in there, they don't want to be the animal control officer. In most communities in Connecticut, their responsibilities are nowhere near that of a police officer. They basically handle, they say domesticated animals, but it's really dogs. It's like your traditional dog catcher. We moved away from that with Mark. And it's, as you know, it's been absolutely tremendous. The amount of service that he was able to provide, the contacts that he had. I mean, we do the survey every year of knocking on thousands of doors to see if people are in compliance with their rabies and their licensing, and just the positive aspect of that, never mind the public health aspect of that, is tremendous. That's what we're looking for again. I don't know, I think it would be very difficult, like if I polled the 39 officers here, anybody want to do this? I don't think we're going to have anybody who's interested. So I think keeping it the same way is a good thing. It would probably be much more of the norm. And then we wouldn't be using that person for other responsibilities as well. It would be this is their task. And Mark's personality, I mean, that's what we're striving for with everybody, that type of energy with our officers, because I think that's helped build quite a reputation of service and trust here.
So this may open up a huge can of worms, but I want to try to understand this more, pivoting away. So because but it does tie into the ability for you guys to be effective, folks to be effective public safety officials. Your response to medical calls, is that something that's good or bad? And what I mean by that is if you weren't responding to medical calls, that's one of the things that Jen in her presentation highlights effectively, how much time is taken off because of that. Now, but is that in level of expectation, a type of, I don't know if it's included in community policing, so I don't know if we'd never do that. But we realize we're doing that because maybe we have a deficiency in the ambulance, so we need those folks there. So then the issue is, do we staff up on the ambulance, and then that removes you guys from being there? But are we the kind of community that would never, ever consider removing a police officer, no matter how many people we had?
Yeah. So there are days where we may have 10 medical calls. I mean, we had one earlier this week where it was just nonstop all day long. You can't have 10 ambulances to handle, or 6 ambulances in this town to handle.
I understand that.
When you then may go one day with 1 call or no calls. We are a very integral part of that, and I would not be advocating to look otherwise on that. We're trained at the EMR level, the emergency medical responder level. We provide Narcan. There have been CPR calls. We're there on almost every medical call. We are there much earlier than the ambulance because we're already on the road and working. So I don't think it's designed that way because there's a lack of adequacy in the ambulance.
Okay, that's
setup.
that helps, okay.
Yeah, I don't think so at all. I think it's, you have now anywhere from 4, 5, or 6 officers who are out on the road who are trained really well, who can stop that bleed, who can try to dislodge something from somebody's throat,
Yeah.
who can perform CPR, who can give somebody oxygen who can't breathe. I don't think you can beat
Well, there's
that.
probably more value in this, just the psychological support that's given to the person who's waiting for assistance. The fact that someone comes, right, and then they're waiting. Okay, so but we have this. For me, we have this triangulation of, well, we're down resources because we're pulled to do this, and then the ambulance. So it's a conversation that I think includes other
Yeah,
services.
understood.
in
You know,
town.
I think that if we were, you know, if that was taken from us as one of our responsibilities, I mean, I can't see where the mindset of these officers would be, there's a medical, somebody needs help right around the corner, and I'm not gonna go because it's not our responsibility.
Yeah, it's just understanding what we have. Okay, thank you.
Plus, it's also one of those types of calls that helps us provide like a positive impact on the community as opposed to us going to a domestic where maybe we make.
100%. I'm just
trying. If we're viewed as the bad guy or the negative, you know, connotation of that, this is a positive interaction where we can help somebody and it kind of gives us a more of a foothold in the community, you know, on a positive level. And so we really have to kind of build that social capital of the community in a positive way, and it's a good way to do that.
And I agree, and I want to continue what you just said, because I think we want to take this conversation in a different direction with respect to the domestic situations. Chief, do you have numbers on those calls? Just overall in terms of, because the reason I want to go there is because of our social worker debate the other night. which I think
That was
is
my
really-
next question was,
And obviously, you guys are aware that we're talking about embedding a social worker within your force on a follow-up basis, right? So obviously, you're working with social services on that.
Do you have the domestic numbers on you?
Right here.
Oh, okay, I was gonna pull them up for you if you didn't have them.
Yeah, embedded implies a lot of connotation.
I know what you're talking about. So yes, I have those numbers. So, again, fortunately for our community, you know, we see a decline in family violence offenses that are, you know, where they're calling the police, where we're involved. So, 2017, we went on 130 calls for domestic related. we'll go to 2019, we'll go pre-pandemic. That was down to 85.
well,
2021, 87. So you can see the graph a little bit, you
Yeah.
know, it goes down, then it's sort of steady the last 3 years.
That covers all categories of what we would view as a domestic or family violence
Yes.
situation. Again, we don't need to get into the
Yep,
specifics.
yep,
but-
and that includes the ones where there is an arrest made, and those where there isn't an arrest made, where it's just, there's been no crime committed, but somebody called us and it was a dispute among the family, but no crime. So, you know, so that ends up being, you know, one every
It's different than
3
that.
days or so.
Yeah.
Problem is, it's not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 8 to 4. It could be 3 all of a sudden on a Sunday night.
Yeah.
You know, it's scattered all over.
One thing that would be helpful for me to understand as we're thinking about the police social worker position is what are the kinds of things, like what are the kinds of, not that they would be assisting with the call, but like post-call, what are the kinds of calls that they would be assisting with, and what kind of work could they potentially be taking off of your officers' plates that's better handled by a social worker? Like just understanding what that means more practically would be helpful.
So, I can, right now, like for domestic violence cases or family violence cases right now, we have a team. It's usually made up of one person and a supervisor. For us, it's Tracy Dunn and sometimes Lauren Devon, and a supervisor who will do a post-review on that. And that post-review is, did we follow all the guidelines? Did we follow policies? Or anything that we can do for this family in our capacity? think getting a social worker perspective on each one of those post-domestic calls that we go to is very important to help to deliver some service. Even though there's only 130 in that year, in 2017, I don't think the numbers really should be the driving factor for who may need help, because not everybody calls, especially with domestic violence. And if there's another avenue to get some help and they don't call us, that may be, where that social work service is.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? Is there insight or a way to make that connection? Or is that, you view one of the potential places that a social worker has to go find those relationships?
Yeah, I would say that that's probably somewhere they have to find those. Like, we don't have those. I mean,
Okay.
every once in a while, we'll have somebody say, I hypothetically have a question.
Yeah,
You
I'm
know
not
there's-
suggesting you're omniscient, but at the same time, sometimes, again, there's no call for service, but you guys are.
Right,
Okay.
right. Well,
there-
and then, yeah, and in a lot of cases, it then becomes a call for service
Okay.
because we may document.
Is there,
it.
maybe I've maybe missed this in Kristen's presentation, but is there also a component that you're looking for this position, or you would advocate for it in support of her efforts to bring this position on, in support of your own officers for their own needs as well?
No, I didn't.
Is that, okay.
Yeah, that we've had many talks about it, since last year, and I am an advocate and in support of more social workers. And specifically, we worked out, could there be some time that was dedicated to the police-related aspect? So maybe 4 to 8 hours is sort of what I could come up with per week, where the post-reviews of not just domestics, but the overdoses, the substance abuse. I was friendly with this guy who was on the ambulance service for many, many years. He worked at St. Francis Hospital, and when I was a patrol officer, if I came across somebody who said, now's the time, I want a bed, I want to go somewhere, I want to get treated, I could call him, and he would make calls, and it would happen, right there. Now, we don't have that. That was just an individual connection that I had made. We don't have that. So if you have a social worker who is in that field and constantly is able to find out what the resources are right now, may be different tomorrow, may have been different from the day before, so that aspect. So we run into a lot of that, where it's an overdose or it's a DWI, and during that we find out that there's a significant issue. It's not a one-time or second-time thing. There's some substance abuse here. It'd be nice to be able to make a referral to an actual person instead of saying call 211. Or somebody else, or call it. Or just getting shipped off to the hospital where they may or may not get the services that they want or need.
Yes, because one of the things you highlighted in your presentation, Jenna brought up hers, was that, we've got the burden on your staff, right? The experiential burden on your staff when you're understaffed, and then the pandemic and whatnot, and how they're feeling of just mental wellness, and physical wellness. I thought that might be a component that person may play in the culture within your department as well,
So last year, we brought on a police chaplain.
right? I remember that.
And that is one aspect of the purpose of the police chaplain, is to make that connection also, because they have a lot of resources. I was going to say, I just don't think that, the way that any of us really foresee the role of that social worker is going to take away from any of our responsibilities. It's not going to help with what we do. I think it will help with the
But it's
problem
not there
issue.
to, there's no part of the conversation where that person is being added to actually help your own people with their own well-being.
Correct. Yeah, not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
We had talked, sorry, I was going to say, we did have some conversations, and Kristen was in agreement that, her staff could provide some training support to the staff.
Yeah.
Particularly around, mental health issues, things of that nature. So, in that regard, I think they could provide training support, but we hadn't
Yeah.
talked about
But not for their
counseling
own-
services.
Yeah, but definitely, part of that 4 to 8 hours, because we don't have 4 to 8 hours of reviewing the 130 domestics and then the substance abuse calls. We don't have that, but coordinating with our training personnel on how to get information to us, that will be beneficial when we respond to these, because we're still going to be responding to these as first responders.
So my question, since we got to spend some time talking about the social worker that would work with the police department, but I wondered if you could speak a little bit, another part of what Kristen presented was having a social worker that would work with like a youth services board and provide support for youth and their parents that are struggling with mental health issues or, you know, perhaps some vandalism issues or assault issues? Or can you address at all like what you're seeing happening with like that segment of our population? Because everything it seems like you hear talks about the strain that adolescents and children are having and how there's such a lack of resources for them. So what do you guys see on that?
Yeah, I think that we haven't seen that strain personally, as far as responding to crime by juveniles or disturbances. We haven't necessarily seen that. So, again, a very fortunate place to live, that our juvenile crime is very, very low. And that's not to say that there's no need for it. We're not seeing the need for it in the way of it coming to the attention of the police, any more or less than before.
Well, not just the crime, but are you seeing anything with mental health issues with youth, or does that?
It's been fairly steady.
straight.
You know, there are some people who want to reach out to the police for help, and there's some people who don't. You don't want to, so we don't necessarily experience that and have really good numbers on who may need help.
Can I ask a question?
Wait,
on the-
so-
Oh,
No,
I'm sorry.
No, I
Oh,
already
okay,
got
I was
one.
gonna
No,
be.
I'll go after- I'll go-
Sorry, I didn't.
Go
I
after
can't see behind me.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
So around social services, well, has there ever been, you know, obviously a social worker is not working weekends and, well, perhaps in evenings, the
yeah.
middle of the night. But there are some 24/7 type clinics and places and have we ever partnered or thought of partnering with one of those as an option to send as the next level or in emergency situations, because they do deal with also different types of issues as well.
So from the police department standpoint, we have, and, you know, we work with the interval house. We go through and we do an assessment to see if for domestic disturbance, if the person should consider shelter elsewhere, and we will coordinate that. We have a phone to give them so they can make that phone, or we can make that phone call for them. They can talk with somebody at the interval house to set up a plan. We also looked at a program that started in Manchester several years ago for substance abuse. When somebody says that's it, I want to get treatment right now, they would actually have the transportation right to a hospital. And with our setup, that wasn't working here. We didn't have that. That's the extent that we've gone to as far as that. Besides, once in a while, somebody, you know, reaching out to us and saying, here's my card. But as far as a program from our standpoint now,
So
I don't know about social services.
I guess my question is, you know, is that an option as opposed to having the social worker hire, or, and if not, kind of what's the difference in with that social worker position, what does that add differently than just being able to refer them to these places?
Yeah. So, you know, without thinking a whole lot about it and thinking back to, you know, my 23 years here, and people invest a whole lot more effort into their job, whether it's paid or voluntary, because they have connections here. So not to knock any services that may be out there outside of our town, but people who live here take a lot of pride in what they do, whether it's our voluntary services or you know, or paid. So I would be a little bit concerned about that. Like if we're hiring somebody out, I know that there then may be like tension. Well, I have to go to, you know, another jurisdiction. I'm going to get to you guys when I can. Obviously, we would not have a social worker who is here 24 hours a day. I think it's important to have that social worker perspective on things. I think it's important to have somebody who has the regular information and those connections here. You know, we had talked about how it would physically work, maybe going out and doing a visit somewhere, which we do now. Our community services officer goes out with the social workers often here, or social services, to check up on people. So if they're following up on an overdose, maybe they're more comfortable talking with the social worker than with us. We've never really done that follow-up on an overdose. Most people don't want to see us return if they've overdosed. So you bring somebody along with a different hat, and maybe it's a benefit there. But I don't know how that would work, but.
No, I understand, you know, the benefit of what you're saying with making the connection, because I know even
Yeah.
at the high school, with having Officer Patel there,
Yeah.
that connection that he makes with the families and the
yeah.
follow-up has been,
Yeah,
you know, fantastic, so.
yeah.
Just asking a potentially hard question, and you're not allowed to think about it, but we're debating putting this social worker position that's kind of dotted line to your organization in social services. As I think through what you're saying, does it make sense, has it been done to actually put the social worker in your organization? Therefore, you have the ability to order them in 24/7 as needed versus working for someone else and having, and again, it's, I want to be careful with how I say this, but if they work for you, you get a different level of service than if they have a different boss.
Sure. Well, first, I think we all work very well together, so.
Agreed.
But
But there's a difference when my boss
But I
calls me,
understand what
I
you're
gotta
saying.
get my
Yep.
butt to
Oh, yeah,
work
yeah,
versus
sometimes there's a
someone
little,
else's
yep,
boss called.
yep, no, I get it.
Yep.
So with the accountability changes, in 2020, we had to propose, or submit to OPM an accessibility on social workers in the police department. So we spent a lot of time thinking about it.
Okay.
And came up with that potential 4 to 8 hours of work here. So I don't think that we could have somebody sort of under my roof to be ordering in for the occasional 4 to 8 hours that may or may not happen, each week. Where I think we come up with that 4 to 8 hours is you've got, reviews of some reports, some of the existing material. I mean, I have, we send over to social services. Here. We send over to social services every year. You can see the red increase. These are the medical calls of anybody age 60 and over. We send them to social services and they just take a quick view of them. Some they follow up on, some they don't, but 2021, we sent over 1,027. So, I mean, that may be a position, something that person does, but either way, with all that, it's really not much more of a 4 to 8 hour a week, maybe coming up with some sort of training for us, whether that social worker provides it or just coordinates it. So being under here, I don't, and the call out, it takes time, and we have officers right there that are responding. It wouldn't be in lieu of us.
Yeah, but it's really interesting to me, and I want to be careful with it, because 4 to 8 is very different than the 40 that we've been talking about.
Well, just for policing,
their
just
specific
like,
needs.
almost like Tom has mechanics, and they could probably figure out on a weekly or bi-weekly basis how much is dedicated to maintaining our cruisers.
Yeah, but I guess, so there's only 4 to 8 hours of work coordinating with the police department a week, so what is
Yeah.
the other 32 hours for the police social worker gonna do?
Yeah, right, so that's like sitting with them, helping, going through the review, but if they're making connections with folks and, and doing visits and doing case management and doing follow-up.
That's not part of the 4 to 8?
That was not part of my understanding at all of the 4 to 8, because, if a social worker is, again, doing case management and follow-up with people, it's more than that. I probably would welcome an opportunity to have Kristen come back. I wasn't expecting us to maybe go into the social work conversation during the chief's presentation.
Well, I think it's important that,
I mean, we put the word police social worker in.
yeah, I think
Here we are.
He's actually a community social worker, but
Community police social worker.
how could we ask Kristen the question about the police department without, she can't answer, we have to ask these questions now.
yeah. Oh no, that's fine. I would have had her join for. I thought we would be talking about this during service improvements, and so I apologize that I don't have her here, because we did also do some follow up after the questions on Thursday evening. Again, I think that we just need to provide additional information and kind of reset, because the conversation didn't really quite go as we had anticipated, based on the feedback, and I think we have a lot more information we can share with you, present, and kind of just make it a little bit more methodical and hopefully
Yeah,
clear
and I'm
up
not
the
trying to rehash
questions.
the thing, it's just, we've got the chief here, he has perspective, obviously, you've done it, and I'm not trying to undermine the conversation, it's for education purposes.
Yeah,
And what
and
does that 4 to 8 hours mean? Again, because we're spending $1 million of some taxpayers' money, potentially. These are just baseline questions for me to wrap my head around, what am I deciding on, is really what I'm looking at.
Yeah, and again, I think we'll get to this hopefully more during the service improvement conversation, because again, just, we didn't really get through that conversation in a way we had hoped. But, you know, again, if we have to prioritize of the two social work positions, you know, again, our feeling is that the youth and family social worker is the number one priority. And then if we had to only, again, go with one, that we would probably really take a look at our current social work services and how we could, on, you know, some sort of reduced kind of scaled effort, provide some of those services that the chief
Yeah.
are talking about for those calls. You know, we do see the greater need, particularly with youth and families at the moment. So again, if we ever, you know, when we get into that conversation further, you know, we can talk some more about that.
That's fair. No, but I appreciate the cost. Honestly, I would have thought the 85 would have gone up to 130 based on what you read every day, not the
Yeah,
other way around. It's
yeah, and
interesting.
I don't want to say that we're
saying-
necessarily unique, because you're going to find other communities that are like this as well, but somewhat unique.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'm continuing to keep an open mind with, and to argue on behalf of Kristen, is that she may also be somewhat responding to, while are the numbers for calls of service may not increasing, I think if you listen to her, the intensity of the events are certainly heavier than they were in the
Not
past,
debating
which
the
is what,
past,
you know,
just
so
surprising.
let's not lose that component as well, yeah.
Not poking holes in the argument, just I'm surprised that, again, it's.
I would have thought this, I was, Sean, I
made an
was
assumption. I would have thought
surprised.
they would have doubled.
I was surprised
Yeah,
too.
it
I'm glad they're not, but
maybe I imagined reading this, but isn't there something that during the pandemic, when everybody was home, people were home with their domestic abuse partner, so that they were less apt to make calls because they didn't really have anywhere to go to make the calls? I don't,
yeah,
I
I'm
don't
not
know
saying
if
the
that was
problem,
an
I'm not saying the
article or.
problem's gone away, but yeah.
I didn't make that up, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But it was harder to
Yeah.
try to separate yourself from where you were, and resulted in less people reaching out for help.
That's fair.
So I have a question unrelated to this, and it's around dispatch. And I'm just curious how dispatch services work and overlap with other dispatch departments in town, such as ambulance and fire, and is there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're the 911 center, so any 911 call comes into the police dispatch center. And we do if it's a medical, we do what is called EMD, that's emergency medical dispatching. So we go through a series of questions to ask to find out what the proper resources are to send for help, and that includes police, ambulance, whether it's an EMT, ambulance, and/or paramedic. And then sometimes the fire department even gets sent out on those. They receive all 911s regardless of what they are, and they don't transfer those unless it happens to be outside of our town. So we will occasionally get an accidental 911 here when the emergency is in Avon or in Granby, and vice versa. The ambulance doesn't have a dispatch service. We provide that. The fire department does, and they operate the same but very differently. So they're able to tell the responding fire personnel where fire hydrants are. They keep track of all of their units to go. We just do the initial response to them, or the tone for them. We tone them out. So we send the notification out to them. You have a call at this particular location. This is what's happening. Then they take it over from there on their frequency, on their separate frequency.
And do you find that the way the dispatch service works now, or system works now, is the most efficient?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just curious if it's, you know, where
We've gone through,
Oh, we did?
yeah,
Okay.
we've gone through
It is
so many
not
studies
cheaper
on
to do
this,
it
and,
originally.
I'm new here, sorry.
yeah,
Nor does it make it
No
better.
stupid
the
question.
level of
It's a good
service,
question.
and again, some of it comes back to the point about you live here, you work here, you're
Yep.
invested more here. So there are communities where you call 911 and it's 300 miles away, and you have, you're where? Where are you? Where our dispatch receives a 911 and the person says, I'm by an old barn, I see a tree that's fallen over, they're like, okay, I know where that is.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get that if you call Avon, because they don't know Simsbury.
Yeah,
you
I
know?
wasn't even looking at the regional aspect. That was more as internally, is it working?
Could be either one.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
I have a question again, getting back to the calls, and is it fair to say that the biggest increase, and maybe you're not seeing an increase in any call volume, but it sounds like if you are, it's more in traffic? Is that the case, like increase in
Bears.
speeding and accidents, or where are you seeing increases?
So no for accidents. So we've been, I think, again, very fortunate. The accidents have trended down over the last decade. I would like to try to take some credit for that, because we had the traffic enforcement officer, and we've really been focused on trying to
Here's some awesome
increase traffic safety. But I don't want to take credit for that, because if it goes the other way, I don't want to take the responsibility for that. It's the driver. But, when we have a cruiser there and they see that, people put down the phone. They pay more attention. I would say that those calls are probably one of our larger ones that have increased, even though they've always been there. They've always been there. It's been a little, almost like mental health issues. They've been a little bit more intense the last year or so, because I think no turn on red means I'm just gonna go. I think red light, means I can turn left if I want. It's really changed for people, and they go at a much more speed that they're comfortable with, as opposed to the sign that says this is what you should be driving at. And we do have a few other types of things that have gone up. I know our fingerprints have gone up significantly, our pistol permits have gone up significantly. All these things do add up for time. Again, the big concern about traffic is we haven't been able to respond, I think, the way that we could respond.
Okay.
Just get back historical. You guys went to new uniforms a couple years ago. We paid for those, right? How those working out?
Great.
They fine?
What do you think?
I don't mean like the Chiefs fill. I don't mean like you're filling them out anymore, Chief. No, I'm saying it's
Glad you noticed.
No, but I'm like, all I had in the back of my mind is like, oh my gosh, we're gonna get 2 years down the road, and these were made like crap, and they're coming undead. We're gonna have to replace those. So those are working out.
They are working.
And then the cruisers and the replacement vehicles he talked about. Are we buying the same things we bought before? What are we? I mean, we touched upon that was a valid question, but has there been any evolution in what we're buying as far as the fleet? Is it going to be the Explorer again? Going to be a Taurus again?
We beat between the V Explorers. We have a couple Tahoes that we.
Yeah, Tahoes were approved 2 years ago, and they still haven't come in yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the 3 ads would be patrol cars,
Yes.
Yes.
and those are
Yeah,
Tauruses,
Maseratis,
right?
or what are we doing?
No, those are Explorers.
Oh, the Explorers. So we're going away from a sedan. We don't have any more sedans at
We
all.
don't make them anymore.
Okay, really?
Ford doesn't make a car anymore, they only make SUVs.
Okay, I thought for the what do you call them? Police SR, whatever it is.
They
Yeah.
phase those out.
Okay.
and,
So they're-
That's why even the state, they're all run all SUVs. They don't-
And how long are we going with? And how's our new livery going? Are we happy with that? The darker
Yeah.
livery on
I
the
mean,
cars?
some people like, other color schemes.
It's a little menacing,
A little more what?
It's a little menacing,
You guys blend into it.
Menacing.
Can't see
Yeah.
it.
But okay.
So
Mini cruiser,
years
I
ago,
could
years ago, we sort of had four new cars every year,
Mm-hmm.
and that changed to 3, I don't know, probably maybe 2005 or so. That's just a rough guess. The 3 is really a good system for us. We occasionally will run into some issues because they stopped making the Crown Victoria, and then we didn't know what to go to. And then we went with the Taurus and the Explorer, and then the Taurus, I don't even know if they make that as a police
Okay, I thought it
package
was.
anymore.
Okay, sorry.
So it's just the Explorer or the next size up, the Tahoe. And, in speaking with the mechanics at the highway garage, Ford is really what they know. Ford is the biggest company in the market for equipment. Some troubles that we run into is they change the body styles inside and outside, and we may have a prisoner cell system that works in a 2018, but it doesn't work in a 2019, and you have no choice. So that sometimes changes.
Or Tesla.
Or Tesla,
And-
definitely would
and
not
we're
have
repl-
it.
advocating
We
for
are
Teslas
replacing,
to be
we are
more-
replacing the animal control truck as well?
That's not,
In a few years.
yeah.
I thought that was this year, okay.
That's the rescue dog.
Okay, thank you.
We had like the Jurassic Park Jeep for that instead.
Lift it up a little bit.
Nick, the one thing, and I'm sure I don't know if you've heard it from Ray, the newer Explorers are a lot more work for us to maintain. They have all of these fancy underbody shields and things for sound and better fuel mileage, but every time we go to do servicing on them, it's a frustrating vehicle for our staff to work on. It's the challenge of all of these vehicles that are being built this way.
Yeah, and the water pump is a good example. Like, years ago, they may have been able to change a water pump in the Cruiser pretty easily. You now have to take the entire engine out to do that. It turns into a multi-$1,000 repair if it's outside of
They're
warranty.
driving up the dealership repair abilities to be
Yeah.
more.
So, yeah, it's,
Yeah.
what it is.
You wanna ask about boots too, Chris, or you good?
I'm good.
Chief, thank you.
Chief, thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Before we do capital?
Should we?
Says Jason's in the end.
It's your meeting.
All right, so you want to take a five before we start the capital conversation, or is there anything anybody wants to say before we do that?